I never thought a simple family dinner would become the moment that changed everything. My name doesn't matter anymore, but what happened that night will haunt me forever. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to keep our family together, even when it seemed impossible. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. It was a cold November evening in Chicago when my brother Marcus called. His voice carried that familiar tone of entitlement that I'd grown to recognize over the years. "We need to talk," he said. "Family dinner at your place this Sunday. Everyone will be there." I should have known something was wrong. Marcus never asked for family gatherings unless he wanted something. The house had been in our family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his own hands back in 1952, working double shifts at the steel mill to afford the materials. Every brick, every beam carried the weight of our family's history. When my parents passed away 5 years ago, they left it to me, not because I was the eldest, but because I was the one who had stayed. I was the one who had taken care of them. In their final years, while Marcus was busy building his real estate empire in California, Sunday arrived with an unexpected warmth for November. I spent the morning preparing my mother's famous pot roast, the same recipe she'd used for 40 years. The smell filled every corner of the house, bringing back memories of happier times when we were just kids running through these same hallways. I set the dining room table with our grandmother's china, the delicate blue and white pattern that had survived 2 world wars and countless family celebrations. Marcus arrived first, driving his brand new Tesla, a stark contrast to my 10-year-old Honda parked in the driveway. He walked through the front door like he owned the place, his expensive suit and polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floors my father had refinished just before he died. Behind him came his wife, Jennifer, a woman who had never hidden her disdain for what she called our modest lifestyle. Their twin boys, now 16, barely looked up from their phones as they entered. My sister Sarah arrived next, with her husband Tom and their daughter Emma. Sarah had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who tried to smooth over every conflict with a smile and a change of subject. But even she seemed tense that evening, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Tom shook my hand with his usual firm grip, but his eyes avoided mine. The last to arrive was my youngest brother David, now but still carrying himself like the rebellious teenager he'd once been. David had struggled with addiction for years, and I'd been the one to help him through rehab, to give him a place to stay when he had nowhere else to go. He looked healthier than he had in years, his face fuller, his eyes clearer. I felt a surge of pride seeing him doing so well. We gathered around the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals as children. The conversation started normally enough. Updates about work, the kids' schools, holiday plans, but I could feel an undercurrent of tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Marcus kept checking his watch, and Jennifer kept glancing at him with meaningful looks. It was during dessert, as I was serving my mother's apple pie, that Marcus finally revealed why he'd called this gathering. He cleared his throat and stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad's wishes," he began, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used in his business dealings, "about this house and what they would have really wanted." I felt my stomach drop. The fork in my hand suddenly felt heavy, and I set it down carefully on my plate. "What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew where this was heading. Marcus pulled out a folder from his briefcase, the kind of official-looking document that meant trouble. "I've had some lawyers look into the inheritance," he said, spreading papers across the table like he was presenting a business proposal. "There are some irregularities in the will, some questions about Dad's mental state when he signed it." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the same clock that had marked time in this house for 60 years. Sarah's face had gone pale, and David was staring at Marcus with an expression I'd never seen before. Even the teenagers had looked up from their phones, sensing the gravity of the moment. "What are you saying, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus straightened his tie, a gesture I remembered from our childhood whenever he was about to do something he knew was wrong. "I'm saying that this house should be sold, and the proceeds divided equally among all of us. It's what's fair. It's what Mum and Dad would have wanted if they'd been thinking clearly." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This house wasn't just property to me, it was home. It was where I'd nursed our mother through her final illness, where I'd held our father's hand as he took his last breath. It was where I'd planned to spend the rest of my life, surrounded by the memories of the people I'd loved most. Dad was perfectly clear when he made that will, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He knew exactly what he was doing. He left me this house because I was the one who stayed. I was the one who took care of them. Marcus's expression hardened. You manipulated them, he said, his voice rising. You isolated them from the rest of us, made them dependent on you, so they'd leave you everything. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the table at my family, searching for support, for someone to defend me against this character assassination. Sarah was staring at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. Tom was studying the pattern on his napkin. Even David, who owed me so much, seemed to be avoiding my gaze. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. I stayed because they needed me. I gave up my own life to take care of them. Jennifer leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table. That was your choice, she said coldly, but it doesn't give you the right to inherit everything while the rest of us get nothing. I realized then that this wasn't just Marcus's idea. This was a coordinated attack, planned and executed with the precision of a military operation. They'd all discussed this beforehand, probably multiple times. They'd made their decision about me and my motives without ever asking for my side of the story. I can't believe you're doing this, I said, looking directly at Sarah. After everything we've been through together. Sarah finally looked up, and I saw tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, but Marcus is right. It's not fair that you got everything just because you lived closer. The betrayal was complete. My own sister, the one I'd thought would always have my back, had joined the conspiracy against me. I felt something break inside me, something that had been holding me together for years. Marcus was still talking, explaining his legal strategy, outlining how the sale would work, discussing real estate values and market conditions. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about all the sacrifices I'd made, all the opportunities I'd given up to be the dutiful son, the responsible brother, the caregiver who never complained. I thought about the job offer I'd turned down in Seattle because Dad was getting sicker. I thought about the woman I'd been dating who'd left because I couldn't commit to moving in with her while Mum needed round-the-clock care. I thought about all the nights I'd spent in hospital waiting rooms, all the doctor's appointments I'd attended alone because my siblings were too busy with their own lives, and now they wanted to take away the only thing I had left, the only tangible reminder of the parents who had loved me enough to trust me with their most precious possession. But as I sat there listening to Marcus's cold, calculated presentation, something else began to grow inside me. It wasn't just anger, though there was plenty of that. It was a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For too long, I'd been the accommodating one, the one who always gave in to keep the peace. I'd been so focused on being the good son, the reliable brother, that I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet room. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting to see how I would respond to their ultimatum. You want to know what Mum and Dad would have really wanted? I asked, my voice growing stronger with each word. They would have wanted their children to love and support each other. They would have wanted us to honor their memory, not fight over their possessions like vultures. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I held up my hand to stop him. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't going to let him have the last word. But since you've made it clear that this family is nothing more than a business transaction, to you, let me tell you how this is really going to work. I walked to the old secretary desk in the corner of the room, the same desk where my father had paid bills and written letters for 30 years. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a folder I'd hoped I'd never have to use. Inside were documents I'd prepared years ago, just in case something like this ever happened. What's that? Jennifer asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. I returned to the table and spread out the papers, mirroring Marcus's earlier gesture. These are the receipts, I said calmly. Every medical bill I paid for Mom and Dad, every prescription I picked up, every home improvement I made to accommodate their disabilities, every grocery bill, every utility payment, every expense related to their care for the last 8 years of their lives. The room was so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Marcus was staring at the papers with a look of growing concern. The total comes to just over $240,000, I continued. Money I spent out of my own pocket because I loved them and because it was the right thing to do. Money I never asked any of you to contribute, even though you were all perfectly capable of helping. Sarah's face had gone white. We didn't know, she whispered. You didn't want to know, I corrected her. Every time I tried to talk to any of you about Mom and Dad's needs, you changed the subject or found an excuse to get off the phone. You were all too busy with your own lives to be bothered with the messy reality of aging parents. I pulled out another set of documents. These are the property tax records. I have been paying the taxes on this house for the last 5 years, even though technically I didn't own it yet. That's another $38,000. Marcus was studying the papers now, his business mind automatically calculating the numbers. I could see the realization dawning on his face. And this, I said, producing a final document, is the appraisal I had done on the house last month. Current market value is $420,000. I sat back down and looked around the table at my family. So here's what's going to happen. If you want to contest the will, if you want to force a sale of this house, that's your right. But first, you're going to reimburse me for every penny I spent taking care of our parents. $278,000, plus interest. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Marcus was frantically scribbling numbers on a napkin, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time all evening. Jennifer was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Sarah was crying openly now, and Tom was patting her shoulder awkwardly. That's not fair, Marcus finally said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Fair, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been you helping me take care of them. Fair would have been you visiting more than twice a year. Fair would have been you acknowledging that I gave up my own life to make sure they were comfortable and loved in their final years. I stood up again and began clearing the dessert plates, my hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. But you're right about one thing, Marcus. This isn't about fairness. This is about family, and apparently, we don't have one anymore. David finally spoke up, his voice hoarse with emotion. I didn't know about the money, he said. I would have helped if I could have. I looked at my youngest brother, the one I'd pulled out of more scrapes than I could count, the one I'd never given up on, even when everyone else had. I know you would have, David, but you were fighting your own battles then. I never expected you to help financially, but you expected us to, Marcus said, his anger returning. You expected us to just hand over money without being asked. I expected you to care, I replied simply. I expected you to be part of their lives, not just show up for holidays and birthdays. I expected you to be brothers, not business partners. The weight of years of resentment and disappointment was finally lifting from my shoulders. For so long, I'd carried the burden of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never complained or asked for help. But I was done with that role. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm and measured. You can take your lawyers and your legal challenges and do whatever you think you need to do. But this house stays with me, just like Mom and Dad wanted. And if any of you ever want to have a relationship with me again, it's going to be on my terms, not yours. Marcus was gathering up his papers, his face red with anger and embarrassment. This isn't over, he said, but the threat sounded hollow. Yes, it is, I replied. It's been over for years. I just finally realized it. One by one, they filed out of the house, the same house where we'd grown up together, where we'd shared so many memories. Sarah paused at the door, turning back to look at me with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said again. I never meant for it to go this far. I know, I told her, but sorry doesn't change anything. You made your choice. After they left, I sat alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what had been intended as a family dinner. The grandfather clock continued its steady ticking, marking the passage of time in a house that had seen so much joy and sorrow, so much love and loss. I thought about my parents, about the sacrifices they'd made to give us a good life. I thought about the values they'd tried to instill in us, the importance of family, of loyalty, of taking care of each other. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been forgotten by everyone except me. But as I sat there in the quiet house, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I was sad, certainly, and disappointed, but not angry. I'd finally stood up for myself, finally refused to be taken advantage of by people who were supposed to love me. It felt like waking up after a long, troubled sleep. The next few weeks were difficult. Marcus did hire lawyers, just as he'd threatened. But when they saw the documentation I'd provided, when they calculated the actual financial impact of my years of caregiving, they advised him to drop the case. The cost of reimbursing me would have been more than his share of the house's value, even if he'd won. Sarah called several times trying to apologize, trying to explain her actions, but I wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. Maybe someday we could rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, not the old pattern of me giving and her taking. David was different. He came by a few weeks later, not to argue or justify, but simply to apologize. He sat in the same chair he'd occupied as a child, looking around the room with new eyes. "I never realized how much you gave up," he said quietly. "I was so focused on my own problems, I never saw what you were going through." We talked for hours that day, really talked, maybe for the first time since we were kids. He told me about his struggles with addiction, about the shame and guilt that had kept him distant from the family. I told him about the loneliness of being the caregiver, about the weight of responsibility I'd carried alone for so many years. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. David began visiting regularly, helping with yard work and home repairs, slowly rebuilding the bridge between us. He was the only one who seemed to understand that family isn't just about blood relations or shared inheritance. It's about showing up, about being there when it matters, about choosing to love even when it's difficult. As for Marcus and Jennifer, I never heard from them again. They moved back to California permanently, selling their Chicago properties and cutting all ties with the city where we'd grown up. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought about what they'd lost, if they ever regretted choosing money over family. But mostly, I tried not to think about them at all. The house became truly mine in a way it had never been before. I began making changes, updating the kitchen, refinishing the floors, adding a small garden in the backyard where my mother had always wanted one. Each improvement felt like a way of honoring my parents' memory while also making the space truly my own. I started hosting dinners again, but with a different kind of family. David came regularly, sometimes bringing friends from his support group. I invited neighbors, co-workers, people who had become important to me over the years. The dining room that had witnessed so much conflict became a place of warmth and welcome. Once again, one evening, as I was preparing dinner for a small group of friends, I found myself thinking about that terrible Sunday when everything had changed. I realized that as painful as it had also been necessary. For too long, I'd been living my life according to other people's expectations, sacrificing my own needs and desires to maintain relationships that were fundamentally unequal. Confrontation had forced me to recognize my own worth, to understand that I deserved better than to be taken for granted by people who claimed to love me. It had taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to set boundaries, to refuse to enable behavior that hurts you. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 8 o'clock, the same sound that had marked time throughout my childhood. But now, instead of feeling trapped by the weight of family obligation, I felt free to choose who I wanted in my life, free to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. As my friends arrived for dinner, filling the house with laughter and conversation, I realized that I had found something I'd been searching for my entire life, a family that chose me just as much as I chose them. Not because of blood or obligation or inheritance, but because of love, real love, the kind that shows up and stays and never asks you to be less than you are. The house my grandfather built with his own hands had become more than just a building. It had become a home in the truest sense, a place where people were valued for who they were, not what they could provide. And that, I knew, was exactly what my parents would have wanted. Looking back now, I can see that my brother's attempt to claim my house was actually a gift, though not the kind he intended. It was the push I needed to finally stand up for myself, to recognize my own worth, to understand that I deserved better than to be taken advantage of by people who were supposed to love me. The shock on his face when I presented those receipts, when I turned his own business logic against him, was worth every difficult moment that followed. He had expected me to roll over, to give in, as I always had before. Instead, he discovered that the quiet, accommodating brother he thought he knew had found his voice at last. And in finding that voice, I had found myself. Hey, if this story touched your heart, drop a comment with the word family below. Don't Forget to subscribe to hear more incredible true stories that will change how you see the world. What happened next changed everything even more. 3 months after that disastrous dinner, I received a call that I never expected. It was from a lawyer, but not one of Marcus's lawyers. This was someone representing my father's old business partner, a man named Robert Chen, who had worked with Dad for over 20 years before they both retired. Robert had heard about the family dispute through mutual friends, and he had information that would change everything I thought I knew about my inheritance. He asked if he could come to the house to discuss something important about my father's final wishes. When Robert arrived the following Saturday, he was carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that meant important news. We sat in the living room, the same room where my father had spent his final months, watching old movies and telling stories about his younger days. "Your father was a very careful man," Robert began, pulling out a thick folder. "He knew that his decision to leave you the house might cause problems with your siblings, so he took steps to protect you, steps that even you don't know about." I felt my heart racing. What kind of steps? Robert opened the folder and spread out several documents on the coffee table. He set up a trust fund, funded by his life insurance policy and some investments he'd been quietly building for years. The trust was designed to activate only if anyone challenged your inheritance of the house. I stared at the papers, trying to process what he was telling me. "I don't understand." "Your father knew Marcus well," Robert continued with a slight smile. "He knew that Marcus would eventually try to claim the house, probably using legal challenges and accusations about your father's mental state, so he created a failsafe." He pointed to one of the documents. "If anyone contested the will regarding the house, this trust would automatically transfer an additional $500,000 to you, along with detailed documentation of every conversation your father had with each of his children in his final years." My hands were shaking as I picked up the document. $500,000. "Your father was more successful than any of you realized," Robert explained. "He lived modestly, but he invested wisely. He wanted to make sure that if your siblings chose greed over family, you would be protected and compensated for all the years of care you provided." I thought about Marcus's confident presentation that Sunday evening, his legal threats, his assumption that he could intimidate me into giving up my inheritance. He had no idea that his actions had triggered exactly the scenario my father had anticipated and prepared for. "There's more," Robert said, pulling out another set of papers. "Your father also documented every instance when he asked your siblings for help and was refused. Every missed visit, every excuse, every time they were too busy to be involved in his and your mother's care." As I read through the documents, I saw my father's careful handwriting recording dates and conversations I'd forgotten about. The time Marcus had promised to visit for Dad's birthday but cancelled at the last minute for a business trip. The time Sarah had said she was too busy with her daughter's school activities to help with Mom's doctor appointments. The countless times David had been too deep in his addiction to be reliable. But there were also notes about me, records of every sacrifice I'd made, every opportunity I'd given up, every night I'd spent at the hospital or at home caring for them. My father had been watching, documenting, preparing to protect me from exactly what had happened. He loved all of his children, Robert said gently, but he knew which one had truly been there for him and your mother. This trust was his way of making sure that love and loyalty were rewarded, not punished. The activation of the trust required me to file certain legal documents, which Robert helped me prepare. Within a week, the additional funds were transferred to my account, along with a letter my father had written to be delivered only under these circumstances. The letter was in his familiar handwriting, the same careful script he'd used to write birthday cards and Christmas notes throughout my childhood. As I read it, I could hear his voice, calm and loving, explaining his decision. "My dear son," it began, "if you are reading this letter, it means that your siblings have chosen to challenge your inheritance of our family home. I am not surprised by this, though I am deeply saddened. I had hoped that the love and respect we tried to teach all of you would prevent such a situation. But I have learned that hope and preparation are not the same thing." The letter went on to detail his reasoning for leaving me the house, his gratitude for my years of care, and his disappointment in his other children's lack of involvement. But it wasn't bitter or angry. Instead, it was the thoughtful reflection of a man who had watched his family dynamics carefully and made decisions based on actions, not just words. "You gave up so much to take care of your mother and me," He wrote, "You put your own life on hold to make sure we were comfortable and loved. That kind of sacrifice deserves to be honored, not challenged. This additional inheritance is not just money. It is recognition of your character, your loyalty, and your love." The letter concluded with advice that would guide me through the difficult months ahead. Do not let their greed poison your heart. You are a good man, and you deserve to be surrounded by people who recognize and appreciate that goodness. Build your own family, one based on choice and mutual respect, not just blood and obligation. When news of the trust fund reached my siblings, their reactions were exactly what I might have expected. Marcus was furious, convinced that I had somehow manipulated our father into creating this additional inheritance. He threatened more legal action, but his lawyers quickly advised him that the trust was ironclad and that any further challenges would likely result in additional penalties. Sarah was devastated, finally understanding the full extent of what she had lost by siding with Marcus. He wrote me a long letter, apologizing not just for the dinner confrontation, but for years of taking my sacrifices for granted. She begged for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild our relationship. David's reaction was different. When he learned about the trust, he came to the house and sat in the kitchen where we'd eaten countless meals as children. "Dad was smarter than any of us realized," he said quietly. "He saw all of this coming." "Are you angry?" I asked him. David shook his head. "How can I be angry? You earned every penny of that money. I just wish I had been in a better place to help you when Mom and Dad needed us." Over the following months, I used part of the trust fund to make significant improvements to the house. I updated the electrical system, replaced the old furnace, and renovated the kitchen with modern appliances. While maintaining the classic style my parents had loved, each improvement felt like a way of honoring their memory, while also preparing the house for whatever future lay ahead. I also used some of the money to travel, something I hadn't been able to do during the years I was caring for my parents. I visited places they had always wanted to see, but never had the chance to explore. In a way, I was taking them with me, fulfilling dreams that caregiving responsibilities had made impossible. But the most important thing the trust fund gave me was security and independence. I no longer had to worry about property taxes or major repairs. I could make choices about my life based on what I wanted, not just what I could afford. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The house became a gathering place for a new kind of family. David visited regularly, often bringing friends from his recovery program who needed a safe place to share a meal and conversation. I started hosting monthly dinners for neighbors, creating the kind of community connections my parents had always valued. One evening, about 6 months after the trust fund was activated, I was preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Sarah standing on the porch, holding a bouquet of flowers and looking nervous. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she said before I could speak, but I needed to try one more time to apologize, not just for what happened at dinner, but for everything. "For all the years I let you carry the burden alone." I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She looked older, more tired, as if the weight of her choices had been wearing on her. But there was also something different in her eyes, a humility that hadn't been there before. "I've been going to therapy," she continued, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could turn against her own brother. The therapist helped me see that I was so focused on what I thought was fair that I never considered what was right. I stepped aside and let her into the house. We sat in the living room, the same room where Robert had revealed the trust fund, and talked for hours. Sarah told me about the guilt she'd been carrying, about how the money from a potential house sale had never really been about the money at all, but about feeling like she deserved something for being Dad's daughter. "I realize now that you deserved everything and more," she said through tears. "Not because you were Dad's favorite, but because you were the one who showed up. You were the one who loved them enough to sacrifice your own life for theirs." It wasn't an immediate reconciliation. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But it was a beginning, a recognition that family relationships require work and commitment. From both sides, Sarah began visiting regularly, not to ask for anything, but simply to spend time together, to slowly rebuild the connection we'd once shared. Marcus never reached out. According to Sarah, he and Jennifer had convinced themselves that I had somehow orchestrated the entire situation, that the trust fund was evidence of manipulation rather than preparation. They remained in California, cutting all ties with Chicago and the family they'd grown up with. But I found that I didn't miss Marcus as much as I thought I would. The brother I mourned was the one from our childhood, the one who had protected me from bullies and taught me to ride a bike. The man who had tried to steal my inheritance was someone I barely recognized, someone whose values had become so different from mine that we might as well have been strangers. This story is getting intense, isn't it? The best part is coming up next. Make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. A year after that terrible dinner, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Emma, Sarah's daughter, now 17, and preparing for college. She had always been my favorite niece, a bright, thoughtful girl who reminded me of Sarah at her best. "Uncle," she said as we sat on the front porch, "I wanted to thank you for not giving up on Mum. She's been different since you two started talking again. Better, more like the mum I remember from when I was little." Emma told me that the family conflict had affected her more than the adults had realized. She had watched her mother struggle with guilt and regret, had seen how the pursuit of money had nearly destroyed the family she loved. It had taught her important lessons about what really mattered in life. "I'm going to study social work in college," she announced. "I want to help families stay together, help people understand that love is more important than money." As I listened to Emma talk about her plans and dreams, I realized that something good had come from all the pain and conflict. The next generation was learning from our mistakes, choosing different values, different priorities. Maybe that was how families really healed, not just through forgiveness, but through growth and change. The house continued to be a place of healing and connection. David brought his girlfriend to meet me, a kind woman who understood his struggles and supported his recovery. They were talking about marriage, about building a life together based on honesty and mutual support. Sarah's visits became more frequent and more natural. We began creating new traditions, new memories to balance out the painful ones. She helped me plant a garden in the backyard, the same garden our mother had always dreamed of having. As we worked together in the soil, our hands dirty and our backs aching, we talked about forgiveness, about second chances, about the difference between earning something and deserving it. One day, while we were weeding the tomato plants, Sarah asked me a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think Dad knew this would happen? Do you think he planned for us to fight like this?" I considered her question carefully. "I think Dad hoped we wouldn't fight," I said finally. "But he was wise enough to prepare for the possibility. He knew that money changes people, that grief makes people do things they wouldn't normally do. The trust fund wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. Protection for you," Sarah said quietly. "Protection for all of us," I corrected her. "It protected me from being taken advantage of, but it also protected you from making a mistake you couldn't take back. If you had succeeded in forcing me to sell the house, if you had taken money that wasn't rightfully yours, how would you have lived with that? How would you have faced yourself in the mirror every morning?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, her hands still working among the plants. "I never thought about it that way," she said finally. "I was so focused on what I thought I deserved that I never considered what I could live with." That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Sarah began to understand that the trust fund hadn't just been about rewarding me. It had been about teaching all of us a lesson about the true cost of greed, about the difference between wanting something and earning it. As the second anniversary of that fateful dinner approached, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. The house was more beautiful than it had ever been, filled with love and laughter and the kind of family connections my parents had always valued. David was thriving in his recovery, building a stable, healthy life. Sarah and I had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. But perhaps the most important change was in me. I had learned to value myself, to recognize my own worth, to understand that I deserved to be treated with respect and appreciation. The quiet, accommodating man who had always put everyone else's needs first had found his voice and his strength. The trust fund had given me financial security, but more importantly, it had given me the confidence to build the life I wanted rather than the life others expected of me. I was no longer defined by my role as the caregiver, the responsible one, the brother who always gave in to keep the peace. I was simply myself, a man who had learned that love without respect is not really love at all. On the exact anniversary of that dinner, I hosted a small celebration. David and his girlfriend came, along with Sarah and her family. We ate the same pot roast recipe, served on the same china, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of tension and hidden agendas, there was genuine warmth and affection. As we sat around the table, I raised my glass in a toast. To Mum and Dad, I said, who taught us that family is about more than blood. It's about showing up, about being there when it matters, about choosing love even when it's difficult. 2 second chances, Sarah added, her voice thick with emotion. To the courage to stand up for yourself, David contributed, looking directly at me. As we clinked glasses, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing for years. The family that sat around this table wasn't the same one that had gathered here 2 years ago, but it was better. It was built on truth instead of obligation, on choice instead of expectation, on love instead of guilt. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the living room, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. The grandfather clock chimed 10 o'clock, the same sound that had marked time throughout my childhood, through my parents' illness and death, through the family crisis that had nearly torn us apart. But now, instead of feeling burdened by the weight of family history, I felt grateful for the lessons it had taught me. I had learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who teach us the most about ourselves. I had learned that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I had learned that real family isn't about who shares your blood, but about who shares your values. The house my grandfather built with his own hands had become more than just a building or even a home. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the power of love to overcome greed, of the importance of recognizing and rewarding loyalty and sacrifice. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I thought about my father's letter, about his advice to build my own family based on choice and mutual respect. Looking around at the life I had created, at the relationships I had rebuilt, and the new ones I had formed, I realized that I had done exactly that. The brother who had tried to claim my house had given me something far more valuable than he had intended to take away. He had given me the push I needed to finally claim my own life, my own worth, my own right to be treated with the respect and love I had always given to others. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all. What do you think about this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate triumph? Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true stories that will inspire and shock you. The next story I'll share will blow your mind even more than this one did.